Welcome. So as you know, this is a Daddy Magazine event. So we're so excited. This is our first panel talk of the year, so it's really nice to have you all here. So my name is Delali Amegah, the event coordinator for this event, helping out Kemi, the founder of Daddy Magazine. So the theme for tonight is publishing by us for us, and we have a wonderful, amazing guest speakers. So we have Linda Nübling from Girls with Curlz, and also Scott Kränzlein, so former managing director of Nataal and now a board member. So essentially it's just discussing, just giving space, for underrepresented communities to express themselves and just talk about their different industries, tell their stories, share their stories in their own ways, on their own terms. So that is about it. And I'll just give the mic to Kemi.
Thanks so much, Delali. Also, thank you, Soho House, for having us, and thanks to all of you for showing up. It's wonderful to see you. And yes, as Delali said, this will be a conversation about publishing for underrepresented communities or underrepresented audiences. We'll have a conversation for about 45 minutes, when there will be time for questions and answers. You can also look at the magazines and purchase them over there. And what else? Yes, we will record this conversation, and you can take pictures of us, but it's a private members club, so please be mindful of that and don't take pictures of the audience unless you have everyone's consent. I think that's it. I think we can start. I will start with introducing myself. I'm Daddy. So as Delali mentioned, I'm the founder of Daddy, and Daddy is a print magazine. We started out online 6 years ago and moved to print 3 years ago. And so for us, the premise is that we center underrepresented voices. So our audience and our contributors are mostly from the BIPOC communities, from queer communities and underrepresented audiences. So much for myself. Linda.
Hello. I'm Linda Nübling, communication designer and the founder of Girls with Curlz magazine. We also do print and now develop something to also dive into the digital world. And Girls with Curlz is a magazine that is a space for the perspectives and life realities of Black women. And especially we focus on German-speaking regions. So this is maybe something special about us.
Thanks so much. Thanks all for coming. Really appreciate it. My name's Scott. I'm a sort of strategic advisor and agent for creatives. I started working with Nataal in about 2015. That's when the publication was originally founded. It was conceived as a website, predominantly to promote Black African and Black British talent, which was something that I and the other founders felt was very underrepresented at the time. And initially it lived just on social media for about three years, and we had our first print issue in 2018, the second in 2019, and we had this very long COVID break, like everyone, and we had our third print issue was just published last year.
Okay, so let's dive right into it. As we all know, the publishing industry is overwhelmingly white. It's incredibly elitist, and so one of the things that we want to discuss tonight is what happened since the summer of 2020 when Black Lives Mattered. And what remained the same, and also what are the realities and challenges of publications that center underrepresented audiences. And I'm saying underrepresented audiences because, for Daddy, it's we have a strong focus on black voices and black stories, but it's not just that. And also, what I forgot to mention is that we publish in English, and our audience is international. So I think it's also quite interesting that all of us serve different audiences and have different approaches. Yeah. So. So what would you say are some of the challenges in this elitist, predominantly white industry?
I would say that, first of all, to go back to your opening comment about 2020, when all of a sudden, everybody was extremely interested in us. And for a while, we had sort of lived at the margins. We essentially had the magazine, we printed the magazine, which was a huge effort and a very costly undertaking. But after 2020, all of a sudden we received a lot of attention, which was very welcome, because with that also came a certain amount of revenue. So all of a sudden, people were interested in working with us, working together with us on projects. Although, my experience with that was not always, I would say, 100% positive, because for many companies, I think what still remained is that the message that we were trying to communicate didn't really, it was the circus treatment. So when you tried to have conversations with people, we tried to go in depth and talk about, what was wrong about the industry and why there were no black people or very few black people working at the company. Their eyes would start to glaze over. So it was somewhat a perfunctory exercise, but of course you're not going to turn that away because it means revenue for your magazine. It means a way to support and build your community, and that's something that's very important.
To be honest, I can't really dive deep into challenges I experienced with other, the white market or white people working at brands or publishing houses or something like that, where we were in touch with, because we weren't. And what I realized is it's sometimes really hard to make people who are not involved in all these stories, not black people or underrepresented communities. I always have a feeling I have to convince them that it's important and that it matters and that there is an audience and there is a market that needs to be served and who's also longing for magazines like that. So we're developing right now maybe a strategy maybe to grow or make Girls with Curlz more visible to a wider audience. And I think there I will maybe have to face some challenges that I'm not there yet, and hopefully the challenges are not as big as I maybe imagined them, but let's see.
One mic info. So, my next question, thank you for this. My next question is, how did Black Lives Matter affect your magazines? And what has changed since then? Because I can talk from my experience with Daddy when we launched. I was actually in 2020, so we decided to go to print in February. Then we had the lockdown. We launched during lockdown. But I think because of Black Lives Matter, I think we had maybe a false sense of security, because it was our first year of being being a print. And for me it was interesting to see how the interest waned over the over the last couple of years and months. And especially now, I feel like it's kind of, the window of opportunity. It feels like it's closing. Other topics are more important for other audiences. So I'm wondering how you're experiencing this.
We started Girls with Curlz in 2017 with an installation exhibition piece, and the print magazine just came in 2019, and we're publishing this year the 5th issue, which is kind of awesome, but also we experienced that Black Lives Matter was like of course a push in a way, a really painful one, of course. And I remember that in 2020 I thought, luckily I started Girls with Curlz 3 years earlier, because I had the feeling that there was like a trend going on now, hopping on that topic, and people expecting all Black people to do something or to create something they can like learn from and that teaches them. And I think that Black people should not use their art and their projects, whatever they do, to be a teaching tool. It can also just exist as for being culture. And I think that I recognize that lots of brands were really interested in working with us in that year, and maybe like in the beginning of 2021 as well. And now sometimes I have the feeling it's just around Black History Month they remind themselves, oh, there was something, maybe we have to do something. Not every brand, of course, but that's what I recognize, that it's really centered around Black History Month. And over the year we have to face our challenges and just make it through somehow.
Yeah, I can pretty much echo what these guys said, is that, we came off this huge high after about a year or so, and you really felt the interest starting to dwindle. Also the subject matter admittedly did become more complex, because I think, after 2020, people were just like, oh, let's just work with Black people and do something, so it wasn't very guided, or it wasn't very structured. And I think that as we moved ahead, a lot of things became more complicated. Like, for example, can a company, just because they work with a Black publication, basically state that they support Black people? No, they can't, really. That's not enough. And so when we started to, because that's sort of our job, we started to push a little bit harder on highlighting certain issues, and maybe, very admittedly quite gently highlight problems within the company in regards to employment, in regards to staff and representation. The interest was gone very, very quickly, So that was like very disappointing, just on a level that you wanted to communicate everything that you had spoken about for many years. And people had sort of started to listen, but then all of a sudden, it was like they just turned away and lost interest. I know the world's a very complicated place, and there's a lot of problems going on these days, aside from Black lives. But I don't think it's asking too much to, just maintain a certain level of interest and also engagement with your Black audience, and with your Black vendors. And in America, maybe to some degree, even though they've enforced it, it hasn't also been entirely successful. We see that in entertainment, and we see that in publications. We see the same things have happened there, as the interest has waned.
Could we get a second mic, maybe? Is that possible? Yeah, I think it's it's really interesting and it's sad to hear what you just mentioned. And I think also part of the reason why I thought it would be a good idea to have this event and to talk about what it's like, to publish and to center underrepresented voices. When we first planned on having this event, it wasn't supposed to happen in February because we didn't want it to happen during Black History Month. It was supposed to happen in December, and then stuff happened and we had to change it. But it's this feeling that everything is being crammed into February again, and that was the situation before 2020, and to me at least, it feels like also what you just said, it's like it's kind of happening again, which is sad. And also the thing is, the three of us, that we have different approaches to catering to Black audiences, but we have also a very different point of view, right? Because all three of us are like mixed race. We have one white parent, and it's like none of us can be like the definitive voice on Blackness, Also, the Black experience is so vast. So it was also interesting for me that before this event, talking to you and like seeing, how we feel about this whole, waning interest in like Black Lives Matter movement. We went on a bit of a tangent. Okay, let's go to the next question. What about the financial part? How do you make it work?
Very badly, to be honest. I invested all my savings to start, and now we try that the magazine, that we sell as much that we can like produce the next one, but that also works just like, not all the time it works really well. I still invest sometimes a bit of my new savings I try to make, but to be honest, it's really fucked up because you think that, okay, I'm investing so much time, so much resources. I have like a great team that just does everything because they believe in what I had in mind 6 years ago, and they do it for free, and they are so passionate, and I don't know what I would do without them. But I really have to say that this has to change because it's just exhausting, and the quality that we serve deserves that we can also like not make a living like in total maybe, but not in total, it deserves that we can live from that. And that's what we're working on right now, to find a way how we can like improve that. But it's a really hard way to go there, and sometimes I'm not sure if we can make it, and then I'm like a bit wasted and tired, crying at home there, I don't want to do this up. But then I remind myself of certain like messages you receive, people you talk to, the faces of the women when they receive the magazine, when there's an article about them or from them in the magazine, and you say like, okay, it's still worth it, and as long as I can do it, I will do it. But sometimes you're a bit frustrated that this is the only kind of source you can like, keep it going. So let's see what the future brings.
Yeah, it's very challenging. I mean, I took a bit of a break from it. I gotta admit, it was because like you're financing the thing. You either if it's from your savings or because you have no income, and I mean it's only through the help of all the other people who are involved that helps you move it ahead. So that support obviously is invaluable. You can't quantify, but it's a tough one, because you're always, the one hand you want to sort of push this baby out, and you want to bring it into the world. But you're also dealing with, you have bills to pay. Some people, the contributors, are maybe a little bit more forgiving. Others, the printers, are not. Like if you want to have your magazine, you got to pay. Nataal, because that's what everyone wants, is the production cost of Nataal is quite high. It's like, just to print the magazine, you're looking at £15,000, And, last time we printed a fairly small amount. I think we printed a total of 1,800. So, just there and then you can see just how high the unit cost is, And so although the cover price is comparatively high, you're not making really any money to talk of. And when you sell the issue to a distributor, the best you'll get is 50% of the cover price, So that's sort of like the sort of hard reality of it. With Nataal, it's a little unique in as much, just in closing, is that because we cater to a somewhat global audience, we have to ship this thing across the world. So that sort of adds another layer onto things.
Can I add something? And it also came up in my mind why it's sometimes also really challenging is because you sometimes don't see where the problem is. So you think like, oh, we do like a magazine from Black people for Black people, and then you recognize, okay, it's not that many Black people maybe are buying it or not enough. And sometimes I think like to have like a profit from it would take a few thousand people, and if you think like how many people are living, like Black people living in Austria, Switzerland, and Germany, it wouldn't take a lot because we are a lot, we are many, and so sometimes you wonder why don't we get together and build this force. And of course there are people who maybe cannot afford it, but why maybe sometimes other people, it also can be allies, or that they say, okay, then I buy it for you. Or sometimes we think like this community thought, which comes like from the US, doesn't exist in that kind of way here. It's different, and I'm sometimes still figuring out how is it here to address it maybe in a better way, that everybody feels like, hey, if we want this, we have also the power to make it stay. But sometimes I have the feeling like we don't know this power. And so this is also something which is like often on my mind, and I'm discussing with my team, and we try to find solutions and talk to people. But this is also something we recognize. So how is Black community life in German-speaking countries?
You raised, just because you raised an interesting issue, you're talking about allies, which I think is a really interesting topic that we've all discussed amongst our three. So often you'll, of course, get white people, for lack of a better word, who come to you and who basically say, here's a bit of money, to help you with printing or other things like that. So let's say if you go, I can't speak for the Afro-German community, but in the UK or also stateside, that's it's a tricky issue. How do you deal with that? Is that cool? Or are people just sort of buying your silence, so to speak,
I think the topic of allyship is really interesting, and I'm not a big fan of that term, it's because it basically just describes being a decent person, right? Showing up for others. But I think in our in our situation at Delali, we actually rely heavily on allyship. And I think it's on the one hand, I think there's an issue when you cater to a Black audience or an otherwise underrepresented audience, and you also like have people from this audience working for you. Then especially if it's an indie magazine, if you don't have a big budget, then oftentimes that also means you can't pay people, or you can't pay people as much as you want to pay them. And that's like one of the ongoing challenges at Delali. When we were an online magazine only, like we couldn't afford to pay anyone, and then we went to print. We made the decision, okay, we'll pay people, and it has to work. If it doesn't work, we'll stop printing. But it's challenging, because you love what you do, and these moments that you described, when you get like amazing feedback, when people who are part of the magazine, when they reach out to you and say how to move this to them, that's wonderful, and that's why we do it. It's also challenging and it's heartbreaking if you can't pay people, or you can't pay them as much as you want to, especially when it's about people who are from these underrepresented communities. So I guess the follow-up question for this is, what keeps you going?
The thought of the essence is the thought of imagining myself as when I, like back in the days, was 12 years old, and I would have needed a magazine like that to build a confidence with my identity. And it took me many years to find myself and to accept my blackness, to live it, to thrive in it. It took therapy. And I think this shouldn't be the way for everyone. I think it should be easier to get access to who you are, and see role models in every kind of way who are Black. And so I think this is like on the bigger picture is that, and I do it for my 12-year-old self, and also for all the other 12-year-old little girls who grow up, for the ones who haven't found their self yet, when they maybe now 40 or older, and and all the magic that happens when Black people come together and just feel like, here we are, and we exist, and we also have something to say, and it's not everything about politics and racism. We have like a very we have lots of depth in our culture, and it should be still represented to everyone, and also being embraced, the culture, and not just like focusing on stuff that's painful, which is also necessary, of course, but that's something that still motivates me to do something different.
Yeah, I mean, I think we all sort of feel the same, in that respect. For me, it's about, I'm a bit older, going into detail. I look at a lot of younger people, and for me, that's what I find still very frustrating, is that, I work with graphic designers, with art directors, and still, it is still a very small amount of people. People still come to me and go like, oh, there's no Black art directors or graphic designers, and I'm like, well, not really, but even so, why do you think that is? My sort of biggest beef that sort of pushes me along is that, I think when I look at the educational system, especially in North America and in the UK, it's still lacking. There's a certain percentage of the population is excluded from it. They just are not allowed to partake. And that's why people are underrepresented in these areas. So it has nothing to do with competence or interest. You know, it just simply has to do with the way the system is structured. So in that, I would say to some degree anger. That's what keeps me going. You know.
I can relate to it. I'm back. Yeah. I'll relate. Yeah. I can relate to that because I was when people ask me how Daddy started out, and I usually say that Daddy was born out of frustration, and frustration is also what keeps me going. And I think it's also, you know, it's many of the things that both of you just mentioned, but also for myself, you know, like being a journalist and having worked in this industry for such a long time, it's just incredibly frustrating when you are pigeonholed, when you are asked to only write about specific topics. I mean, I have to say, I also choose specific topics, but it's you know, it's frustrating when you only get asked to write about one thing over and over again, and no one is really interested in your point of view when it comes to other things. And I think one of the things that really annoys me about that is having to cater to a white audience or being asked to explain yourself to a white audience, and that's also something that we don't do. And I think it's very interesting how our contributors sometimes react to this, you know, because they're not used to it. Like, many of them are so used to having to explain themselves, having to explain their blackness, their queerness, you know, their, you know, like going on a Jewish dating app, you know, having to explain how it works and what the name is, etc., you know, when you don't have to do that in a, like, white, cis-het context, you know. So, yeah, that's what...
No, I mean, I think that's a very valid point. I think we've all gotten very used to, and especially what I find very fascinating now is, even given my age, there's a lot of white people in my circle of friends or acquaintances who will ask me about or tell me about certain interactions they've had with black people. And it's sort of like, you know, to some degree I indulge them, you know, but also there is some of them I also feel are looking for absolution. You know, they're looking for me giving them, you know, you did good, you know, like, you know. So it's like, you know, it's like and that I find that's really hard work, you know, like, or even just like explaining, you know, like I remember we worked with a lot of fashion clients over the last couple of years, and some of them quite big, and you know, casting was always a key issue for us, like, you know, because we wanted the representation, or when we did a shoot, we wanted it to be authentic, you know, so like a certain percentage of the team, but also the people who were in front of the camera. Like, we didn't want to play into certain stereotypes. That's what actually was extremely shocking to me, is that a lot of people, even people who are, you know, cool people, young people, have no clue, you know, about, you know, what is a black diva, you know, like, they would choose like an Indian woman, an Asian Indian woman, you know, like, just like stuff like that, which was very confusing for me, which I didn't understand, and you know, you would try and communicate that to them, and they often got they got quite aggressive about it sometimes in defending their decision and their point of view.
Okay, last question before we open it to the audience. What advice would you give to young BIPOCs in the media and publishing industry? Never.
Don't do it.
Okay. I'll go to the other question. What advice? Just do it if you really, really want it. But that I think you can say for everything in your life. If you want to try it and you really think like it's necessary, then do it. But I think what is good to find people who want to maybe do it with you. I think because I started on my own, and I think now I have a team. I'm like, oh my gosh, you can discuss stuff. You don't have the whole responsibility. You can you get also other input because of course I just have my perspective and always try to have it from several angles. But there's always another person who has like 8 other angles looking at a topic. So I think like doing something together makes it always easier, and you don't have to know everything. You don't have to be a person who, when the knowledge is also very, have expertise in everything. I think the advantage would be to be open to learn. And if you're in that kind of state, then enjoy.
It's the issue of advice is I'm very cautious with advice these days, because everybody has an opinion, right? And I think it's if you want to do something, in the worlds of Nike, just do it. There's some stupid truth in that, Sometimes it's good if you're not laden down by advice, because everybody has their own path that they take in life. So I think a magazine is a really interesting tool. I like magazines, I like design. I think it's a really good way of communicating ideas. Also communicating cultural ideas and communicating a cultural point of view in a cultural world. So I think they'll always exist, and I think people are actually sort of like finding their way back to them now because it's more tactile, it's more physical, it's something that you can hold, that you can keep, that you don't flip through in a millisecond.
It's really special, isn't it? But it's also scary.
Yeah.
And expensive.
Yeah. And expensive, yeah. But it also has, like you said, this monumental character. It's something you keep and you take it with you from flat to flat, hopefully. So it's... I think everything that's written on paper has another kind of magic. It's not like an article I read like 2 minutes and then it's like gone in the internet. So it's also like a collection. So and it's also this nostalgic thing I like about magazines and why I did it. So
for sure. We grew up with them.
Yeah.
And I think it's also like, I guess my advice would be to start small.
Yes.
Because you never know, costs can explode. And also what you said, about having a team you could talk to. I think that's super important. And I also, as Scott and Linda now, I had multiple meltdowns last year because we had some mishaps with our magazine. And for me, it was really helpful being able to talk to you. Because it's one thing if you talk to other white publishers, but some of the things these colleagues have said to me, I just really couldn't relate to them, such as, it's completely normal to be in the red for the first 7 years when you launch a magazine. For me it was like, I'm sorry, I can't afford to be in the red for 7 years. We have to make it work somehow, unfortunately I don't come from money, so it's not, it can't be my expensive hobby forever. you know, and it's been nice to talk to you, you know, and it's been nice to talk to people who can relate to this and also relate to, like, have similar audiences. Yeah, thanks so much for being here. Thanks so much for your questions. You were a wonderful audience. Thank you so much for having us.